Okay, there we go. It's on. I timed that perfectly so you didn't have to hear me with my off-key singing. Ray came up to me and he said, he's like, you got to turn the button. I said, you don't understand. We're just fine enough. My voice is already loud enough, so. All right, guys, let's begin with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we just want to thank you for these physical showers of blessing as a channel that let us know that you are showering us with your Spirit. And Father, we desire of your Spirit. We desire that each of us here, Father, live and online, that we may have the mind of Christ. Father, help us, and especially me who will be presenting, to know that I know nothing yet as I ought to know, Father. So in this study, in this message, Father, I pray that seeds may be planted, Father, seeds of truth that may be allowed to be planted in ripe soil, Father, fertile soil, and we just ask that you would bless us with the ears to hear, and that you would hedge us in as well, Father. And we thank you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, so we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, and that is, well, apples will get mentioned, believe it or not. But we're going to be talking about the land. We're going to be talking about agriculture, and we're going to be talking about seeing if this is an important part of the everlasting gospel of the third angel's message. We will not be using that. Nope. And so what I want to do is, I guess, pose this idea that and we'll look at this and we'll see if this is true, but from what I've seen, from what I've studied, there seems to be a clear connection between the restoration of the land and the restoration of the human soul. I think they're inseparable. And I'm really excited about this. I mean, I found Father's led me to some really interesting stuff to look at this more in depth. And some of this has come from Brother Reuben and Brother Adrian, and the dominion of man in the earth and that connection. So we're bringing in a bunch of things together here, and this will hopefully just inspire us with some enthusiasm to ask our Heavenly Father how we can participate in this, and how this can help to give us a fuller sense of the third angel's message. And okay, great. So I'll start with a story, just so you guys kind of know where this came from, this passion came from. When I was in the world, or I guess when I grew up, it was in the country. I was blessed to have that background, to be able to go into nature whenever I wanted. My parents owned some property, and that was also a way that I really had a relationship with my father, with my earthly father. It was spending time out in nature, and our association with nature wasn't from an agricultural standpoint. In fact, I remember when I was a young kid, and you guys probably have all had similar experiences, because we're so far removed as a society in general now from the land and from working the land, right, cultivating the land, and in this idea of farming, which was the foundation of our country. And this is something that, as we've seen, this goes hand in hand from Eden, man being placed in a garden, and then obviously the whole economy of Israel being centered around agriculture. And so yet it's crazy to think that over, since the founding of America until now, I mean, it was something like, 80% or 90% of people were business owners then, and the majority were farmers. And today it's less than 10%, and I think less than 5% of the population farms, and maybe even is like 2%. It's pretty crazy. And so I grew up with this idea, this stigma, and it was validated because we did a school field trip. Has anybody ever done one of those where you go to the farm? Yeah. And my impression was thoroughly disappointing, because we went to a dairy farm. The only cool thing about it is at the end we got ice cream, right? And I guess that was kind of like in a sense, it was kind of the bribe, if you will. Like, excuse all of the fact that this is this mass scale operation by which animals, the dairy cows, are confined in barns. They're brought, hay and feed is brought to them. They're not on the pasture. And then, of course, they get pumped full of all kinds of antibiotics and hormones because they're in a condition that breeds disease. And so you have all these factors going on, and it's smelled. There's all the manure in the barns. And so what kind of impression do you get? Like, well, farming is for the people who are uneducated, right? That's not there's no future in farming, and I don't want anything to do with this. So that's what I believed, and so that's how I grew up. And again, I love nature, but no connection with growing food. My parents had a small garden, my mom did, but I was never very interested. I plant trees, once in a while, and that's kind of, I guess that was kind of my gateway in. But over time, I ended up, because my family has a background, and Shane's dad and my dad are brothers, and they have co-run the family business, Silver Creek Specialty Meats. And so we grew up with a meat processing business. So interesting how Shane and myself are here in this message. And it's only by, divine providence. And so I had this connection to food, what I thought was a connection, and that eventually led me, fast forwarding into college, I started to, God started to draw me more toward this idea of food, knowing where our food comes from, the fact that, believe it or not, what we eat is connected to our health. I know, pretty profound, right? For me, that was a big revelation, because the world doesn't tell you that, which is crazy. And so that led me to start to see some of the challenges with our current society and with the food systems. And as Danny had pointed out, I mean, I wanted to be a part of a solution and not a problem. And so I knew, I participated in a little bit of activism, but I ultimately wanted to provide a solution, a product that people could choose to buy that would be healthy. So or at least what I thought was healthy. So I started a business working with local farmers in Wisconsin that were raising grass-fed cows, right? That they were out on the pasture. They weren't giving antibiotics and hormones and artificial dewormers and vaccinations. They were just doing what they're supposed to do. And so I would work with these farmers, and that ultimately, so then that brought me back to what I had written off, farming, right? I thought, oh, this is all ridiculous. But I saw that, wow, there's actually a difference. There are different ways to farm. And that's the whole organic food movement, right? So I started, really, there was a lot of interest that I had there. And so, but I didn't ever think that, farming would be my occupation or, something I was really focused on. I just wanted to work with the farmers, because I believe these farmers, and I started doing a lot of grocery shopping for all my produce, as much of my fruit as I could, as much of my meat, all that, dairy, all on these local farms. So finding it there, and so I started to see, wow, this is where your food comes from. It's not from the grocery store. A new concept for me there too, right? And so that ultimately led me then into, people started asking me, do you ever see yourself farming? I said, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I like what these farmers are doing. I love what they're doing. We need this. This is very important. And so over the years, and then in becoming an Adventist over these last, it'd be going into almost 3-4 years now, that passion, right, that draw was just being drawn more and more to this, especially when I started reading the Spirit of Prophecy and saw, this is unbelievable. There are actually Christians who care about this kind of thing. I mean, I went to the churches in my non-denominational biblical-based church that nobody cared about health. Nobody cared about farming. There's this huge disconnect. Again, the world has come into the church. And that perplexed me. And I could, never really talk to this with anybody. But Shane had sent me once an email with an excerpt from Patriarchs and Prophets, God's Care for the Poor, that chapter. And he talks about our connection to the land and how closely dependent upon it we are, and how God set up a whole economy based around the annual Sabbaths, and just based because of the weekly Sabbath, and how you would be getting a double portion the 6th year that would get you through the 7th year where the land rests. And I thought, this is amazing. Not only is it's saying we're connected to the land and we have agrarian roots, but it's also telling us this whole system is taking care of the poor as well, because the poor can then come in and they can glean from these fields. You don't clean them out. And so this is, talk about the ultimate welfare-based system, right? God has set it up. We didn't need government to do that for us. And so these things really I never forgot them, and I was really intrigued. And I started to read about, Ellen White has a vision about planting trees. I'm like, are you kidding me? The prophet, right? The Spirit of Prophecy Ellen White has been instructed on how to plant trees. If she's been instructed on how to plant trees, it's probably important. And so we were excited about it. And you know, this is when Shane and I and Amanda were still in Wisconsin 3 years ago. And so we started trying to implement these things on, we rented a farmhouse right next to my parents. We were neighbors. So we could have a garden on our place, and then we could plant fruit trees and whatnot on my parents. And we started to have a lot of fun and just started to learn more about, you know, what is the Bible teaching us, and what is the Spirit of prophecy telling us about these things. And so that's a little bit about kind of why I'm you know, so passionate about this, and how God has been leading me through this process. What's interesting about the garden, if we think back to Eden, I don't have the quote in front of me, but it was to be a safeguard to the happiness of man. To not just be idle in the garden, but to actually have work. You know, the dressing in keeping, as the scriptures say, as the Spirit of prophecy says, of the land. And that was to be a channel. Again, it's not a source of their happiness, but it was to help give them, you know, a meaningful, part of a meaningful purpose. And it's a teaching tool. So I guess that's what we got to ask the question too. What's the purpose of agriculture? Why do we even have agriculture? What is God intending with putting us in a garden and showing us through the scriptures and all the analogies that Christ has given us about the soil in the gardens and trees and vines, and then the fact that, again, this is the system or the method by which He wants us to depend more fully on Him. So, I mean, does anybody have any thoughts? Like, why is agriculture such an integral part of our Christian experience, or at least maybe should it be an integral part? Yes, sister. So Sister Beth said lessons in stewardship. Yes, absolutely. I agree. Any other thoughts on it? See how the seed grows. So there's spiritual lessons. Absolutely. I think that's probably first and foremost the biggest reason for the agriculture, for creation, for nature. You know, it's testifying of God's character. Spirit of prophecy again tells us, like, in every leaf and every drop of rain, every blade of grass, it's all testifying to the name of God. Absolutely. And so Sister Angela had said that it's to also help us mentally. It's to be a therapy for us, because this brings an interesting story. When I was in Australia for Passover, Tony and his wife Debbie, is that her name? Yeah, Debbie told me the story. She said that in America, apparently this was true, this county, I think it was a county jail, they were looking for somebody who could do landscaping. They wanted to get the prisoners involved in this. They thought it would be good. And so they asked somebody to do it, and one of the inmates, and so he had the bright idea, well, let's look through the registry and see if we have any gardeners or landscapers. Couldn't find anybody in the county jail, and so then they go to the state, look at the state prisons, couldn't find anybody there, and by the time it was all said and done, I don't know if he looked across all the United States or just a specific region, they couldn't find a single gardener or landscaper who was in the prison system. So you're absolutely right. To your point, there's something there. There's a connection, and Brother Adrian has brought this out with the dominion of the earth as well. It reflects either, you know, our trust in the peace and the assurance that we get through having our dependency upon our Father through Christ. It's such reflected the peace in the creation, you know, the freedom from famine and disease and pestilences, the assurity of the regular rains and the seed and the crops. Or it can become a curse, and we've seen the effects of the curse. And so it's there as a litmus test for us to determine. It's telling us the condition of our heart. And we'll look at a couple scriptures right now, and I'll just open up with this. It's a short quote from Patriarchs and Prophets 49:3. The home of our first parents was to be a pattern for other homes, as their children should go forth to occupy the earth. That home, beautified by the hand of God Himself, was not a gorgeous palace. So it's saying we didn't need some big immaculate palace, but it was to be a pattern. So that's giving us hints, and we're going to look at some more evidence that this is from Reuben and Adrian. They had found this, talking about the model in the Garden of Eden, that it wasn't just to remain in the garden, it was to go forth. And so just to give us some scriptural context of our relationship to the earth and having dominion over the earth, let's go to Genesis 3:17 to 19. And it says, "And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." That was probably their first conception of what death could be right there. And I just thought of that. It was a couple times ago when I read that. They realized, oh, we were taken, because they probably knew they were taken from the earth. But then, when God told them, if you eat of the tree, you shall surely die, and they misunderstood, and then Satan says, see, you haven't, you didn't die. But then they're afraid God would kill them. But then after they get the new covenant promise, where the enmity is between the woman and the serpent, then they get this interesting description. So it's kind of a side point, but just the fact that you will return to the dust of the earth. So they're getting a picture now of, well, without the assurance of salvation, the Son of God, that's what our destiny ultimately is just to return to the earth. No hope of life. And so, but anyway, so we see here that because of our disobedience, because we didn't believe the words of Christ in telling us, I'm just going to get rid of this book because it's just going to keep doing that. Because we didn't believe that, then again, that mind of Satan was allowed to enter into us. And there's where the curse happens. And so the curse is actually a blessing for us because it tells us what's going on. So what's interesting, what was to be and still is a safeguard to our happiness, but now is bringing forth sweat and toil and tears and hardship. So it's indicating to us that this is a consequence of our heart. And then if we look at going, and we even go further, once Cain slew Abel, the ground then had a second-fold curse. And it says it even yielded even less. And then when we go after the flood, we know that there was then the threefold curse. So this keeps magnifying and magnifying. And so the effects of that, they can be, we're losing all kinds of diversity of plants. We're losing nutrition. We're losing size. We're losing flavor. It's harder to work with the soil. Our ability, that's probably key. I think we really got to make sure we understand this. If we couldn't understand, because the mind of Satan entered us, right? If we couldn't understand the character of God rightly, then how can we expect to rightly understand how to relate with the land? And so the curse is just as much as a curse of our ability to rightly comprehend. And so that, I think, is important. This is just my thoughts right here. I just want to preface that, but that's important as to why we seem to want to take up the plow until. So this is just something to explore. But anyways, let's look at Leviticus 18, 27 and 28. Almost there. Yep, Leviticus 18, 27 and 28. And I think Adrian has shared this one with us before. "For all these abominations have the men of the land done, which were before you, and the land is defiled, that the land spew not you out also when you defile it, as it spewed out the nations that were before you." So we're seeing this connection again, right? This is the negative side of it. That if we're not walking in the statutes and the judgments, if we're not, which is a reflection of the character of our fathers, if we really don't understand that, then again, we're grieving the Spirit away. Satan is allowed to afflict us, afflict the land, and yes, then eventually spewed out. Okay, here's another one last quote on just kind of getting a bit of the framework for our connection to the earth in a reflection, right, of our character. This is from Three Spiritual Gifts, 78.2. The whole surface of the earth presented an appearance of disorder. This is in the context of after the flood. Some parts of the earth were more disfigured than others. Pay attention to that. Where once had been earth's richest treasures of gold, silver, and precious stones was seen the heaviest marks of the curse. Interesting. We've perverted the channel. What were meant to be blessings to lead us to the loving character of our Father, we perverted. And so then the curse it's reflecting that to a greater degree in these areas. In countries which were not inhabited, in those portions of the earth where there had been the least amount of crime, the curse rested more lightly. So there we see. So we think of the deserts. The places where there was the least amount of crime, or the places that had the least amount of inhabitants, or even weren't inhabited, it's telling us there were places of the earth that weren't, they had the least amount of the effect of the curse. So we think of the deserts in the United States. We think of some of the real rugged, barren mountain ranges of the world. We think of the interior of Australia, and you can go on in Africa, and on and on and on. The Sahara Desert. Yes, there are probably untold riches that are locked up underneath there. Well, we're trying, because in man's greed, we're trying to get access to that. And we see hints of it because, you see where specific, all the richest stuff that's coming out of the earth is coming out of these hard-to-reach areas. The diamonds coming out of Africa, and you just look at all of the suffering and corruption in that country, and so many of the other precious metals and ores coming out of the mountains. So that it's not arbitrary. It's a connection. Okay, now here, back to what I had started to indicate about God's intent for Eden. This is from Christ's Object Lessons 289.2. God himself gave them directions in regard to the culture of the soil, and they were to cooperate with him in its restoration. So we see restoration of the soil, restoration of the soul. Let's keep these things in mind. Thus, the whole land under God's control would become an object lesson of spiritual truth. As in obedience to his natural laws, the earth should produce its treasures. So in obedience to his moral law, look at this. This is just beautiful. I'm reading this again. It's probably like the fourth or fifth time I'm reading it, but it really comes through. So you see the pattern right here. So in obedience to his moral law, the hearts of the people were to reflect the attributes of his character. That's Christ's Object Lessons 289. And then the last sentence there. Even the heathen would recognize the superiority of those who served and worshiped the living God. So continuing on into the next, no, not the next paragraph. This is manuscripts 121. So MS 121-1899.17, paragraph 17. Adam and Eve lost Eden. Because of their sin, the land was cursed. Yet if God's people obeyed his requirements and followed his directions in regard to tilling the soil, the land would be brought back to a prosperous and beautiful connection. Men were to cooperate with God in restoring the diseased land to health, that it might be a praise and glory to his name. And as the land they possessed would, if managed with skill and earnestness, produce its treasures, so their hearts, if controlled by God, would reflect his character. Divine pattern. Now notice here, this is why I said my thoughts before. This would seem to say that tilling, as we would understand today, this thing turning over of the earth, this would seem to say that tilling is part of it. So this is something we need to explore. And continuing on here. Yeah, brother.
Well, when we're dealing with land, when we're dealing with land, just like we're dealing with ourselves, there has to be a time of resting it. There has to be a time where the nutrients can be brought back in. When we come on Sabbath mornings, we are actually, in a spiritual sense, rejuvenating our nutrients of our souls.
Yes.
Well, it's the same with the land. The land needs to be tilled, and then it needs that time of rest to go with that in order to balance it and allow that nutrients to come back and rejuvenate.
Yeah, absolutely. Rest is definitely an essential part. It's maybe we'll look at some of the examples in the lesson book of nature to see how that's illustrated. But continuing on, this is the same manuscript now, the 19th paragraph. Canaan would be to them as Eden. Canaan would be to them as Eden. We're talking about the Israelites now inheriting Canaan, if they obeyed the word of the Lord. Through them, the Lord designed to teach all the nations of the world how to cultivate the soil so that it would yield healthy fruit free from disease. Yeah, how amazing would that be right now? I'm praying earnestly to understand so that we can do this because, again, we have a responsibility. If we've inherited the everlasting gospel, then this pattern, this divine pattern that we're seeing, the healing and the restoration of the land, it's going to go hand in hand. So there will be fruit that will be free of disease, that will bear abundantly, that will be flavorful and nutritious. We just have to get on our knees and continue to pray to our Father and ask Him to show us in His lesson book of nature. So it says, continuing on, the earth is the Lord's vineyard and is to be treated according to His plan. Those who cultivated the soil were to realize that they were doing God's service. They were as truly, this is amazing. Yeah, so pay attention to that sentence. Those who cultivated the soil were to realize that they were doing God's service. They were as truly in their lot and in their place as were the men appointed to minister in the priesthood and in work connected with the tabernacle. So again, you can't separate the ministers and those who are working the soil. The economy that God created, we're all members of the same body. And the beauty, it comes out in the spirit of prophecy all the time, because you see comments like, the learning how to bake a loaf of bread is just as important as, giving a message from the pulpit. And then you see, learning how to clean your home. And she's just showing us that our identity isn't to be in our position. It's a gift that God gives us in these abilities and these callings. And we have to recognize we're to bless one another with these, and they're just as essential. And so it's really beautiful. So then continuing on, okay. God told the people that the Levites were a gift to them, and no matter what their trade, they were to help support them. Especially were those tilling the soil to bring in the rich treasures of the earth for the sustenance of the Levites. There's the original tithe right there. A tithe of the fruits of the land. Beautiful. Can you imagine that? Pastor Adrian just gets fed by everything we're producing. That'd be pretty cool, huh? No need to go to the grocery store. We got you, brother. We got you. We know that will be the case on the new earth when things are made new, but I would certainly love to see a taste of that before that time. Okay, so let's see. So let me ask you this question. Is agriculture as we understand it today, is that what's needed to help preach the everlasting gospel? Is that reflecting the new covenant experience? If so, why? And if not, why? Do we have any ideas on that? Yeah, so agriculture as we understand it today, is that what is needed to help preach the everlasting gospel? Is that the kind of agriculture, is that the kind of understanding of the land that will bring about that restoration of the land? That will be, again, it's a symbol or a channel of the restoration of the soul. So am I making sense with that question? The agricultural models as we understand it today, are they getting the job done?
I guess you could say it represents the old covenant, because we're trying to subdue the land with our own power. We're at war with the land. We want it to bear fruit in the way we want it, and the way we force it to bear fruit. We don't trust God. We don't listen to how God's told us to do things. So.
That's it, and that's what our Heavenly Father has really been showing. It's all just exemplify the covenants, and we'll draw this out a little bit more. Go on, brother.
The agricultural world today, and it for the most part, is trying shortcuts, toxins, and poisons, and other methods to try to yield what they can from it, without really a care on how to re-nurture it. I hate to say that, but one of the biggest enemies we have now, which most farmers would absolutely agree, is the amount of mutation of insects. And insects are becoming more and more abundant onto crops. So as they become more abundant from the cursing, from our lack of care, the more they go and do things and methods to just try to destroy the insects and put the food out there on the market. So that's another issue in itself, the insects. But I ask any farmer, and they say, what is it about always having to put some sort of insecticide on a plant? He says, nowadays, if you don't put anything on it, it'll destroy the whole crop. So it's gotten to the point where insects and the land itself is absolutely at a I want to say less nutrient and less flourishing time period. So they're going to do all kinds of horrible methods, and they're doing them.
Absolutely. We're going to look at why that is. We're going to look at specific examples there. So keep in the back of your mind, or in the front of your mind, or on the side of your mind, wherever. Just keep it probably at the forefront, the Old and New Covenant and the relationship to agriculture. Before we go to looking at some of the specifics about why Carl said, if you don't apply chemicals to our crops today, they're going to die. Before we do that, I want to read an example of a curse that is that we can see. So illustrating the manifestation of our hearts, right? The wickedness of our heart and how that's reflected on the land. And this is in context of the Advent message. This is in context of the sanctuary message. And something major happened in the world of agriculture when the Protestant denominations rejected the first angel's message and became Babylon. This is incredible. All right. In 1844, a major epidemic of fire blight erupted from Maryland and Virginia through Kentucky, Tennessee, and the states north of the Ohio River. And this has to do with apples, by the way. Apples. 1844, Utah. Just wait. So apples, all the apples at that time, this major outbreak of fire blight erupts. And it's not just confined to the South. Maryland and Virginia through Kentucky, Tennessee, states north of the Ohio River. That year, the Reverend H.W. Beecher wrote to the Magazine of Horticulture, the blight has prevailed to such an extent as to spread dismay among orchardists, destroying entire collections and taking half the trees in large orchards, affecting both young and old trees, whether grafted or seedlings, in soils of every kind. Many have seen the labor and fond hopes of years cut off in one season by an invisible destroyer against which none could guard. In conflicting opinions, no one was certain whether the disease was atmospheric, insect, or chemical. Pretty amazing, isn't it? The hedge. There's a breach in the hedge. Okay, so now again, we're going to talk about this examples of the food system that we have today, the agricultural approach that we have today, and yes, and think of it as we're looking at these things. Think of how this could potentially relate to an old covenant heart experience versus a new covenant heart experience. Okay, let's start with this one. While food production increased on Green Revolution lands, so we're talking about the Green Revolution, the 60s and 70s and 80s. In fact, okay, let's see. So while increased on Green Revolution lands, hunger still persisted. In fact, a series of international labor organization studies concluded that hunger and malnutrition increased more rapidly precisely in these areas. So the whole thing that they hoped to do to solve world hunger made it increase. To some, like Dr. Keith Griffin, who authored a major report on the Green Revolution for the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, it appeared that new seeds were not neutral. From the beginning, they did not grow as well as the poor farmers as for the richer ones. Achieving high yields, here you go, Brother Carl, required fertilizer and irrigation. Fertilizer and irrigation nourished weeds as well as crops, creating the need for herbicides. And pests found the uniformity of new varieties appetizing, which necessitated the use of insecticides as well. Farmers lacking access to capital to buy these items were simply left in the dust. And let me back up a second. We probably have all heard this at one point or another, but the technology, it says right here, the technology developed during World War II to produce bombs made possible the production of nitrogen fertilizers after the war. Yep. It wasn't only nitrogen fertilizers. We also got, I think we had our potassium-based fertilizers and our, what else are we thinking of? Potassium and phosphorus-based fertilizers as well.
I don't think that's what God meant when he said swords to plowshares.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Okay, so then continuing on with another quote here. Oh man, this is amazing right here. Surveying some 75 types of vegetables. So this is what they did. They looked at the backstory on this is that this organization, RAFI, which is the Rural Advancement Fund International, they looked at the government, the United States government in the early 1900s, like 1901. They had their seed bank, right, or their vault of genetic material, and they based it on what was commercially available at the time. And so they've compared what was available then that they had there that was commercially available. So they're not counting all of the small-scale producers and farmers and home growers and all those varieties. They're just saying what was commercially available at the time. How much of those varieties do we still have today in percentages? And check this out. Surveying some 75 types of vegetables, this organization found that approximately 97% of the varieties given on the old USDA list are now extinct. 97% of the varieties given on the old USDA list are now extinct.
That needed emphasis.
Yes, it sure did.
And we all need to collect our seeds.
Only 3% have survived the last 80 years. And one more. The study also covered extinction of apple and pear varieties. So this is a new figure. I've given you guys figures about apples before. This is coming from a whole other source here. Check this out. And again, this is just the varieties that commercially were grown. Of the 7,098 apple varieties in use between 1804 and 1904 in the United States, 6,121 or 86.2% have been lost. Gone. Of 2,683 pear varieties in use during these same years, 2,354 or 87.7% are now extinct. Can you imagine 2,000 some pear varieties? Can you even imagine that? And this is nothing compared to what it was before the flood. You read Patriarchs and Prophets, you read Spiritual Gifts, you read Spirit Prophecy, it tells you very clearly there was virtually an infinite amount of diversity of fruit. It was amazing. So this is horrifying. And so check this out. This is just a description of one of the pears that they lost. Including among these is the Ansalt pear, of which one of America's premier fruit experts, U.P. Hendrick, once said, in particular, the flesh is notable and is described by the term buttery, so common in pear parlance, rather better than any other pear. The rich, sweet flavor and distinct but delicate perfume contribute to make the fruits of highest quality. This pear should find a place in every collection of pears for home use. Gone, extinct. Wow. Amazing. Okay, continuing on. Let's see. In the process of going after the single gene, okay, this is talking about, we got to back up here one paragraph. Okay, it's talking about the loss of genetic diversity. In the end, all plant breeding programs live by the bottom line. So let me establish this before I finish that. So we have two kingdoms, right? We have a kingdom that is of selfless love, agape, right? Our Heavenly Father's kingdom, not one of force. And Shane and I have talked about this quite a bit. And then we have Satan's kingdom, eros-driven, conditional love, selfish. What do we think has happened over the last 6,000 years? Anytime anybody's ever been in Old Covenant experience, any of the people who have turned their backs on God, that are involved in developing fruit and vegetables and food, and they're expressing eros from their heart, selfish love, what does that mean? What is everything that's available in the store today? All the apples in the store are basically the same thing. They're all big, they're all crisp, they're all super sweet, they're all sub-acid and juicy, and that's it. They can keep in artificial atmospheric conditions up to 2 years. These things can ship well. They're all the same thing. And we lose all that flavor, we lose all that nutrition. And why are they that way? It's just a reflection, a manifestation of our heart. And so our taste, literally our physical taste, that's another divine pattern. It's just perverting. It's perverted, right? Just like because our understanding of God is. And so if we think about that context, this is why we see what we're seeing. This is why all of the food in the stores is but a fraction of what's even available today, and what's available today is but a fraction of what was available even in 1900. And so we check this out. Did you have something to say, brother?
I think it's funny, like, we can be literally judged by our fruit.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we have to, there has to be a consequence, right? There has to be an effect. If we have the wrong understanding of God, if we're not operating in selfless love, that will affect everything we do. And who does all of our fruit breeding? Is it people who know the one true God? No, of course not. Of course not. So that's been really eye-opening for me. It's been really eye-opening. And so, continuing on here. In the end, all plant breeding programs live by the bottom line. Plant breeders are under continual pressure to turn out new varieties for the marketplace. Thus, they take shortcuts that are unknown to our ancestors. Typically, today's plant breeder will search for one major gene to confer resistance for a new variety. So they're isolating, and this is going to go on to explain this, because it's too complicated to try to figure out the almost infinite, probably infinite complexity of the genetic, the different genes that help to contribute to a fruit's nutrition or disease resistance, right? And so they're saying, well, we don't have time to look at that, so we're going to shortcut it. We're going to isolate. We're going to find one gene that has a marker that says, if this fruit that I select, and I grow from seed, it's going to have that gene, so we're going to have some disease resistance. Well, there's a huge problem with that. Resistance, so it says frequently resistance in a traditional land race, so that's a traditional variety, an old variety, right, is not nearly so simple. Resistance may be the product of complex genes, literally hundreds of genes working together. Breeding in this kind of resistance is too time-consuming, too complex, and costly to a modern breeder. But it is effective, and the resistance produced is long-lasting. When you do this isolation, it's not long-lasting. I think we look at a little bit of this here. In the process of going after the single gene for resistance, and they have all these new this is the hope of our salvation with apples and fruit, is disease-resistant new varieties is what they're calling, and that's exactly what this is. They're isolating it. And guess what? The diseases are mutating, right? Because again, our heart is not right, and so this literal fruit is manifesting that, and then again, it's being afflicted with more disease. And so continuing on, the whole set of genes that can provide stable resistance in a land race, again, these heirloom, these old varieties, is often ignored and sometimes destroyed, despite its representing all the plant breeding work carried out by nature over thousands of years. Again, do we trust in God's ways and the way He set it up in nature, or do we trust in man's ways to remove from nature and isolate it and then do the pollination literally by hand outside of its natural environment? Remove all the natural pollinators, remove all the diversity of genetics that gets into it.
And this brings us into GMOs, because GMOs are exactly that, manipulating the gene. And what happens when you get a seed that's GMO? What happens after that crop is finally harvested? It can't produce no more. As soon as a genetic modified seed is used, it's just used for that 1 year. You have to go and get more of them, and it has the resistance. However, a lot of farmers have told me in the past that it is good to do this particular method. Get your best seeds and your strongest crops, and use the seeds from your strongest crops to build up new crops, which is a totally different way of doing that balance. But the balance of focusing on one gene, imagine yourself reproducing yourself, and you're like, well, forget all these other genes. I'm just going to have this particular part of the person in that next baby or whatever. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to think of it on the human level. It's just the same with the seed.
Absolutely.
The seed has all its type of DNA, just like we have ours, and we don't want to take anything away from what is. We just want to make it stronger by keeping it healthier.
Absolutely, and that's the most obvious and wickedest of Satan's attacks on food, right? It's more sinister than that, though. Hybridization is resulting in seeds that they literally cannot be. You can take that seed and it's not going to produce the same variety. It's not even going to grow without massive amounts of attention and focus on man. And there are also consequences to that in the loss of nutrients as well. So that's been going on rapidly over the last 100 years. And it's pretty shocking to see what this looks like across our food.
Ben, you were saying that resistance in plants can be brought in by adjustments to multiple genes. but that the establishment of that just requires too much of an investment. So basically it's not done. Is that right?
Yep.
So that's basically the expression of eros.
Absolutely.
Because the amount of investment that you would have to take in order to get a return is not seen as valuable in your eyes. And so you're not going to invest in something unless you get at least the same back, if not more.
Absolutely.
Which creates the deterioration.
Yeah, one of the greatest expressions of this eros-driven system is the commercialization of agriculture, the commercialization of our food system.
Right.
Because then it just becomes all about making profit and getting there as quickly as possible. So then that drives, because of that selfishness, it's driving the whole system. And nobody wants to do the ultimate way to do what you had just said, which is to have that genetic diversity, is to grow your food from seed. Grow it from seed, but that takes too long. Nobody wants to do that. There's variability in that. And we are impatient and we don't want to trust again. So old covenant condition. Thank you for the rain, Father. And so we look at this, our approach to agriculture, it has mirrored our understanding of the gospel. So a false gospel is going to be expressed in a channel of this false understanding of agriculture and how to grow food, if we're following that. Pretty cool, huh? And so we've approached agriculture the same thing, the old covenant condition. And here's, I want to hopefully paint the clear picture on what does that look like when we approach agriculture, when we approach growing food from an old covenant condition or position. It's saying that what's out in nature, the patterns that are written into nature, the varieties that are in nature, what is actually in the soil is insufficient. What are you doing? Your bed. Oh, wow. We got mine too. Yeah.
Hey, Ben, I have a quick question. You said that the way to get the better way would to grow from seed.
Yeah.
We don't. What do they do? They don't. What do the big companies do? They don't grow from seed. What does that mean?
They have selected a handful. So like for apples, for instance, we had in like 1910, 15,000 varieties of apples in the United States alone. So again, as commercialization of the food system came to be, as Satan deceived us into thinking, give that up to somebody else. You don't have to worry about this. Is too much work.
Oh.
Then they started to they cherry picked the ones that most reflected what would give them the most profit. So they changed our taste and they limited the gene pool. And so then from that point on, they just cloned it. Clones, grafts are clones. You can take cuttings are clones. So, and then they only, if they are going to grow from seed, then they take the seed from that much reduced amount of plants, and then they close it off and they hybridize it in a closed environment. They don't let the bees and the insects and all that bring in pollen from hundreds and thousands of other varieties. Because every apple seed that you plant is going to give you a different tree, a different fruit, just like every one of us is different. And so just to finish that thought, the system that says this old covenant approach to agriculture, it's saying that what God has provided me, all that God said, it's not, I don't believe it. It's not good enough. There's something lacking here. I, because I'm insecure, I must have to do something. It can't all be there in the land. And that's what agriculture is operated on. It's operated on this for who knows how long, hundreds of years at least. But a new understanding, as I'm understanding and seeing it, and if we think of it in the divine pattern, is that the chemistry in the soil, see, we're so focused on the chemical components of the soil, we forget about the life. There's a connection between the plants, the life in the soil, and the chemistry. We've perverted it to think everything is about the chemistry. So the soil inherently doesn't have the chemistry it needs. It doesn't have the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, the micronutrients, and all this. So we need to put it in ourselves. We need to do it. But then we have to ask this question. If that's true, how in the world, there's all this forest around us right now, how do those trees get so big? How do the hickory trees, the oak trees, the persimmon trees, all the trees that bear nuts and fruit, how do they produce thousands upon thousands of pounds of nuts and fruit year after year after year if the soil is deficient? And how do they get that big? That's ridiculous. But that's the attitude that we had. And I had the same thing. This is a revolution for me. And so so we think about it this way, that the life in the soil is what, the biology of the life is what drives the process. So biology makes chemistry available. All soils, as some are starting to look at in the science is confirming, I believe, what the Word is telling us. All soil has the minerals and the nutrients that we need. It's just how are they're not accessible if we don't have the life in the soil. And so it's through, if we think of a divine pattern, right, it's through the life in the soil, the bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes, the protozoa, many things, infinite complexity. We're just scratching the surface. That makes available the chemical components, right? So all the minerals, they break it down, they excrete acids to make that available because the plants can't directly uptake that. So you see, we can't directly go to the Father, we have to go through the Son. It's the same thing, right? And so the plants, what do? Through their roots, they give liquid carbon, liquid sugar in exchange for the microorganisms to give them the minerals. It's the circle of beneficence. It's incredible. And so, but this seems impossible by man's wisdom. And it's really just it's an incredible revelation. And we're going to see some stuff in Spirit of Prophecy here that is pointing us in this direction.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yes, brother.
I just wanted to say because you mentioned real briefly about the honeybees and the bees that are out there and the pollination. Like I was saying about genetically modified, they cannot reproduce. Their pollen has no value to it. In fact, the pollen can actually affect crops that are far away from them if the wind blows it onto crops that are non.
Yep.
But one of the other thoughts on that is that, and this is very scary, the last 2 years, beekeepers have reported a 40% loss in bees. That's a serious amount of bees. And what is the job of the bee? I mean, it all goes into what you were just saying, that circulation of it's horrible what's happening with that too. And that's a concern. So
absolutely. And here's our hope. And we have to remember this, like, this is all very depressing if we just stop here, but because we've been blessed, not because we're worthy, but because we desperately need it, we've been blessed with an understanding of the statutes and the judgments. If we walk in God's ways, as we just read, as Israel was to do, they were to teach all the world, the heathen nations, how to grow fruit that is free of disease and that is healthy and nutritious. So do we believe this? Do we believe our Father wants this for us first? And if we do we believe that He will show this to us? But if we struggle with it, if we can't see it, that's okay. That's the whole point of the new covenant. We might not be able to see it. We might not be able to feel it. We might not even be equipped, but He doesn't call those who are equipped. He equips who He calls, right? And so continuing on here, this is huge. This is what Ellen White is saying about the importance of agriculture related to true education and the preaching of the third angel's message. And so this is from manuscript 59, 1907. Good thing I have a loud voice. God bids us establish schools away from the cities where without let or hindrance we can carry on the work of education upon plans that are in harmony with the solemn message that is committed to us for the world. Such an education as this can best be worked out where there is land to cultivate, and where the physical exercise taken by the students can be of such a nature as to act a valuable part in their character building and to fit them for usefulness in the fields to which they go. Continuing on here, the next paragraph. When we were laboring to establish the educational work in Australia, and this is really cool, guys. You're blessed because she came to Australia. You know, our pioneers who were, the head of leadership at the time, they thought they were doing themselves a favor. And so what by man's standards and what Satan had intended to be a curse turned into a blessing. It's because she had such amazing insights and counsel about agriculture right there in Australia. And so she's talking about, this is I think in relation to Avondale. And so she says here, when we are laboring to establish the educational work in Australia, the Lord revealed to us that this school must not pattern after any schools that have been established in the past. This was to be a sample school. The school was organized on the plan that God had given us, and He has prospered its work. So remember, context to that. cultivating the land is of such an education. And then we continue on. I have been shown that in our educational work, we are not to follow the methods that have been adopted in our older established schools. There is among us too much clinging to old customs, and because of this, we are far behind where we should be in the development of the third angel's message. And then the next paragraph, to make sure, well, are you just pulling that, Ben? Are you trying to take something out of context? Immediately after the next sentence of the next paragraph, it says, the usefulness learned on the school farm is the very education that is most essential for those who go out as missionaries to many foreign fields. This is an important work. This is an inseparable work. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what I want to finish on is the story of selecting the land for Avondale, the land at Currumbong. And this is an amazing story for us. And this, I'm taking parts of it out of her grandson's book, his biography from the Australia years here. Okay. It's a lot that we could say. I just want to figure out where the heaviest hitting part here to start is, just for time's sake. Okay, we're going to go right here. You heard me relate where the words spoken about. Okay, the furrow story. Most of us know about the story of the furrow that was on the land. Ellen White was given a dream and a vision. At least maybe some of us know about this. Okay, good. You're going to love this. At least I loved it. In 1898, this is her grandson saying this. She wrote specifically of an experience with which several were familiar. And to give more backstory, the brethren, including A.G. Daniels, including two men from Iowa, which she's about to talk about, and then including there were several boards, one in South Africa, one in America. She had been given confirmation that this is the land by which we are to establish our school. The school that was not to follow after the schools in the past and not all the other traditions. That she was given instruction by the Lord, they didn't believe it. Again, there's a doubt. And so she patiently suffered long and bore with them. And here's one of the visions that she had that she shared with them that they still wrestled with. This is her speaking now. Before I visited Currumbong, the Lord gave me a dream. In my dream, I was taken to the land that was for sale in Currumbong. Several of our brethren had been solicited to visit the land, and I dreamed that I was walking upon the ground. I came to a neat cut furrow that had been plowed 1/4 of a yard deep and 2 yards in length. Two of the brethren, who had been acquainted with the rich soil of Iowa, were standing before the furrow and saying, "This is not good land. The soil is not favorable. Check this out." But one is capital O here. We're talking about the counselor, our advocate. We're talking about the Son of God. But one who has often spoken in council was present also in this dream. And he said, "False witness has been born of this land." Then he described the properties of the different layers of the earth. He explained the science of the soil and said that this land was adapted to the growth of fruit and vegetables, and that if well worked, it would produce its treasures for the benefit of man. Christ explained to them the properties of the soil. We don't have it, of course. We don't know. The details aren't given. But what that tells us is that what we think we know that constitutes what the health of the soil is not so. Not so at all. And they're rebuked for it. She has this vision. They still don't believe it. It's just crazy. And so it says, let's see here. Where do I want to go? I'll go to this next one here. This is incredible. Okay, so she's now, this is in 1894, and this is her grandson recounting this experience again about Currumbong. From the light given to her, there was no question in the mind of Ellen White that the estate at Currumbong was the place, but several members of the locating committee hesitated and questioned. They battled in their minds between their understanding of Ellen White's clear convictions and their judgments supported by adverse soil reports rendered, this is really key, these adverse soil reports were rendered by government agricultural experts. Where are they putting their trust? In the wisdom of man, which is his foolishness? God's ways are not man's ways. And then she says this morning as I awoke, I was repeating these words to my son Willie. Be careful that you do not show any distrust of God in your decisions concerning the land upon which our school should be located. God is your counselor, and we are always in danger of showing distrust of God when we seek the advice and counsel of men who do not make God their trust, and who are so devoid of wisdom that they do not recognize God as infinite in wisdom. We are to acknowledge God in all of our counsels. When we ask Him concerning anything, we are to believe that we receive the things we ask of Him. New covenant. Do we believe when we pray that we will receive these things? That's what He wants. He wants us to go to Him, and He will reveal these things to us about how to work this out, how to heal the land. Again, the healing of the land goes hand in hand with the healing of the human heart, the healing of the soul. If you depend upon men who do not love and fear God, who do not obey His commandments, you will surely be brought into very difficult places. Those who are not connected with God are connected with the enemy of God. It's black and white. It's not in the middle gray area. We're either connected to the source of life, to this agape love, or we're connected to eros. We're connected to the deceiver and the destroyer. And the enemy will work through them to lead us into false paths. We do not honor God when we go aside to inquire of the God of Ekron. Manuscript number 1, 1895.
Was the dialogue about the healing of the land, her words, or was that editorial?
The dialogue about the healing of the land, she said, not in that way, but she said here, because I think, you came in late, brother.
No, I'm meaning that quote.
That quote that I just read was from her. But when I said the healing of the land, that was not from her. I have quotes in the beginning here about talking about that connection. I'll be happy to share them with you later.
No, I'm just thinking that in that particular event, it sounded like the issue was that was healthy land. And
Correct.
Trust God to choose the land for us rather than the need to heal that land.
Correct. But the understanding of what constitutes good soil and healthy land, we have misunderstood that completely. And so this is another indicator of our misunderstanding of what the soil really needs and how to grow food. Okay.
Part of it, because it just seemed dichotomous, and I didn't catch if that was your words.
Okay. Yeah. Those are my words. Yeah. And I think contextually overall, there's a harmony in that. There's not a dichotomy.
Dream was before that.
Yes. And then she says this is the final quote here about Kurumong and the establishing the school there at Avondale. She says that I cannot for a moment entertain the idea that land which can produce such large trees can be of poor quality. So that's our testament right there. How do we know if the land is capable of producing food for us? Does it have large trees? I mean, it's really, that's completely outside of our understanding that we've always had of what constitutes good soil. So if we can cooperate with what you're telling me, brother, about how this is the counsel that we've been given, if we can cooperate with that, then there will be a restoration, because right now we're destroying the land. We're destroying it because we're saying it doesn't have what we need. We're destroying it by destroying the actual varieties of food we grow, and then we're destroying it by saying, well, this soil isn't, God couldn't have given us what we need, and so therefore let's irradiate it, let's put all these chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. So if we can step away from that and not try to do out of our own efforts and go back to what you're saying, is just trust that God knows what He's doing and shows us, then yeah, we'll succeed.
Certainly in this case, it was who you believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one thing to believe in the spirit of prophecy, it's another thing to believe it.
That's absolutely true. Great point. Yeah, Shane.
Yeah, so as we've been learning about the Old Covenant and the New Covenant and the importance of that and understanding the gospel in its fullest sense, and then the Spirit of Prophecy quotes bringing out that it's important that agriculture has a part to play in the delivering of the three angels' messages. It has some aspect of character development. So we see that man's ways of agriculture, the pesticides, the herbicides, the insecticides, the constant tilling, the constant adding of implements, the degeneration of farming from the 1800s. It used to be little homesteads of families being able to maybe at most, with their servants and everything, be able to tend 50 acres of land. Nowadays, through mechanization and pursuing bigger and more profits and everything, it's grown into huge combines and just massive mega farm corporations. And then genetic modification, all that. That's the old covenant style of agriculture. That's the old covenant style of farming, where we have to do something in order to have the land produce.
Yep.
And the more that we do, the worse it gets. The more herbicides we need, the more pesticides, the worse the bugs get, the worse the diseases get. That's the old covenant in agriculture. We're at a point, though, a pivotal point, where we're seeing that that is not God's ways.
Yep.
So we're at right at this time frame to basically invite our brothers and sisters to be prayerful and seeking to ask our Father and our Savior to learn what is this new covenant when it comes to agriculture. Yeah, what is this? What is our Father's ways when it comes to the land and the plants and growing these things? What is our relation to the land? How are we to work and improve the soil? Not by our understanding, not by our efforts, but by thus saith the Lord and in faith.
Absolutely. And it's as simple as this. If the crux of the new covenant is to believe what God tells us, then the same thing is true in agriculture. We have to believe that what he has given us, even in spite of this curse and all the degeneration, that it has everything that it needs. So we need to recognize man needs to shrink, right? And God needs to have his rightful place to direct us. Did you have a comment, brother?
I have a comment and I have a couple of questions. My comment is that it's obvious that what we're doing in the mechanized system would be good for mechanized people, but it's not going to be good for healthy people. It's not going to be healthy for the environment. It's not going to be healthy for the animals, etc. It's just decimating the soil, taking more out, putting less in. And you and I both know who is behind that. There's only one. But definitely, if we look at the forest, I have a friend that's a forestry scientist, and it's amazing. Look at the forest. How's it growing? How does it produce 350-foot redwoods?
Yeah, absolutely.
It didn't do it by throwing potassium, nitrogen, such and such on it, you know. When that's needed, birds come in. It's just a phenomenal system. Why improve on it? But profit and raping the land for temporary profit. My region, the Dust Bowl, they came in, they killed the animals, to make blankets out of them, they ripped the land apart looking for gold and the like, and they never put anything back in. Before too long, the soil didn't have the moisture, and the winds came and took all the topsoil off. And that area is very hard to, a lot of cattle, because it went down to the rock layers, and the cattle can manage to eat the weeds amongst the rocks, but you got to get the rocks. Every year they smash them in after the rains, they smash them down again. Don't even bother trying to pick them out. But I am curious about I believe that I see something possible in taking the pairs, the decrease or the need to increase more and more varieties. The demand of the market, which is the fruit buyers and the marketers that need something new to produce, because new means new profits. Is that really wise? If you look at the current crops or the current availability of apples, just taking apples, most of them are as you say, they pretty much taste the same within very, very tight parameters. And the Fuji seems to be one of the most popular. It's very high in sugar, but honestly, the Red Delicious whops all the apples that are on the market 4 years ago when the study was done. Still, the old Red Delicious.
Yep, an heirloom.
Yeah, is the highest level of antioxidants in an apple. And so which apple would we eat if we believe that the Father knows what he's doing? And if we would all turn and say, I'm going to eat the Red Delicious, even though it does have a little, a mild pithiness to it, I'm going to eat the Red Delicious because of the health. And then they would move more and they wouldn't put them in the boxes so long, and they wouldn't taste like a cardboard box. So, but the fact that it survives that cardboard box is beyond me. And I would love to see us get, when the scientists do their studies, they just go down and buy apples. They don't go out to the orchard and say, give me some special apples. And so most of the research that is done epidemiologically is done on apples that are in the marketplace at that location. And so there's no chicanery in that region. So I question the need for more and more species. I know what you're saying when you say you plant an apple tree and you don't exactly get the same thing every time because there's stray pollens coming in for hundreds of miles, and that does have an impact. But overall, the heirloom, the heritage, back to the old paths, as the Bible tells us, and the Johnny Appleseeds, and picking out those McIntosh, the Romes, the, those kind of apples. And the red ones are better as far as antioxidant level.
Yeah, there's variations, of course, with different heirloom apples. You obviously have different phytonutrients expressed in different levels with different ones. You can't discount the Granny Smith when you talk about apples on the market. But anyways, we can.
Well, I see, you take Granny Smith, you want to do something for the gallbladder, for kidney stones and the like. It has a higher malic acid content. So it's not that there's not a room for less than red, but we really need to be getting it from back there when Satan didn't really know as much about the land as he does now and how to pollute it. I have another question about the pears and the amount of speciation that we need. And have you done any research, or did that book tell you anything on the sales and the pounds of pears and apples and others that are being sold? If you get a decrease in species, it may well be because those species didn't make it into the market, and so they just killed off the trees, and so they can manipulate the data by saying, well, we've lost all these species. That may be a good thing because they may have been non-fathered properly children to begin with. So what's the effect on the marketplace? What's the effect on pounds of pears, pounds of apples eaten? And if there's a relationship that says, wow, when we lose species, then we lose the amount that's eaten, then I think there's something we need to look at. But the fact that we lose a lot of species doesn't really make me worry. It may make me grin if I know that the consumption's still up.
You got to think about, as we understand why the species were lost, it's driven by a marketplace that's driven by greed and an aerospace heart.
Yes.
So the loss of species it's a big concern. It's a big concern. If we look at, read in the Spirit of Prophecy, Brother Jim, if you look at Patriarchs and Prophets, it talks about an infinite amount of diversity of fruit. So our Father blessed us with infinite abundance. It's just that we've perverted it.
Well, yes, but we're perverting in the way in which we're making new species as well. And
can I, for the sake of time, can we have a prayer and then we can
rebut on
Sure.
this particular part.
Well, I think let's have a word of prayer, and then we can continue the conversation. And then we'll definitely continue.
Because the reason why I wanted to say one other thing was because species have different nutrient values that the other one may not have. And we put like peaches in nurseries and we change out because each species might grow at a different point of season. So we need to have species that'll grow in July where others grow in September. So there is an importance to the different species in how they relate to the land, which we don't understand. This is God's wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. Okay, guys, let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you that you have put us on this earth, and that, Father, even though that it is marred by sin and much of your character cannot be as clearly discerned, but we know that through the cross, all the mysteries of nature can be understood, Father. We know that you have put us in this, one, to testify of your character, to show your love for us, and also to tell us the condition of our heart, Father. And so I pray that we can walk away from this with that understanding of this calling that you have given those of your children to help to bring forth this message that the agricultural work, the restoration of the land, that it goes hand in hand with the restoration of the human soul, Father. Help us to know what this means. Help us to walk in the understanding that you would have us that you would have for us, not of what the experts of the world say, Father. For we know what your scriptures say about this. Help us just to believe the promises of your word, and to believe, Father, that yes, you have provided for us all that we need out in your creation. And we thank you and praise you in the name of your Son. Amen.
Sorry, I disagree with that. Because